The world was still young. The sun rose slowly over an untouched horizon, spilling gold across a land no human city would ever know. There were no roads, no buildings, no bridges. Only the earth, raw and unshaped, wearing its age like an ancient crown. A cool mist clung to the valley floor. The air tasted different, fresher, heavier with the scent of wet leaves and rich soil. The cries of strange birds echoed between distant hills, their calls sharp and unfamiliar. Somewhere in the distance, a herd of grazing creatures moved slowly through the tall grass, their silhouettes bending the dawn light into wavering shapes. Through that world walked Elias. He was not born of this time. His boots pressed into soil that had never felt leather before. Each step left a crisp, perfect print, the edges sharp before the earth's breath softened them. He carried no weapon, only a satchel with water, a small notebook, and a heart full of questions. It had taken years to prepare for this journey, years of studying fossil maps, ancient climate patterns, and the delicate machinery that now hummed quietly in the small device strapped to his wrist. That device was his anchor to the 21st century, but he would not touch it unless necessary. Here, he was a ghost among the living past. The sky above was deeper than any blue he had known. Great streaks of white cloud curled like smoke from some unseen fire. The air carried the faint rustle of wings and the distant thump of heavy feet, the sound of something large moving unseen. Elias stopped beside a low ridge, crouching to brush his fingers over the plants that grew there. They were not like the grasses of home. These blades were wider, almost leathery, their green darkened with purple veins. Dew gathered on their edges like glass beads. A thin insect, bright orange with translucent wings, climbed from one leaf to another, its movement quick and deliberate, its body glittering when the sun touched it. From the ridge, he could see the river. It wound through the valley like a silver snake, broad and slow, its banks dark with mud. Along the shallows, clusters of reeds bent under the weight of strange, long-beaked birds. They dipped their heads into the water, pulling up wriggling fish, tossing them back into narrow throats. Something else was there too. On the far bank, half hidden by trees, a small group of figures moved together. Elias's breath caught. They were upright, not quite human, not quite ape. Their arms were long, their legs shorter than his own, but their posture was unmistakable. These were Australopithecus afarensis. His heart pounded as he watched them. There were 5 of them, 3 adults and 2 smaller ones, perhaps juveniles. They moved with a mix of grace and caution, pausing often to sniff the air or glance at the shadows under the trees. One female bent to pick something from the ground, a root, maybe, and began chewing thoughtfully. The others followed her lead. Elias knew he should keep his distance. This was their world, not his. But the curiosity burned too brightly. Slowly, carefully, he began to make his way down toward the water's edge, keeping low behind the tall grass. As he drew nearer, the sounds of the morning grew richer. The river gurgled over a shallow bed of stones. A chorus of insects chirped and buzzed in the grass. Overhead, a distant call, deep, resonant, almost like a drumbeat, rolled across the valley. The hominins did not seem alarmed. Perhaps it was the voice of something they knew well. The largest male stepped into the water. His movements were deliberate, his eyes scanning the surface. With a sudden lunge, he plunged his hands into the shallows and came up holding a wriggling fish. The smaller ones watched, chattering softly, until he tossed the catch onto the bank for them to share. Elias found himself smiling. In this simple act, in the way they looked after one another, he saw the faint spark of something familiar. A sudden shift in the air made him freeze. The birds along the riverbank erupted into flight, their cries sharp and urgent. The hominin stiffened, their eyes turning toward the forest's edge. From the shadows emerged a shape both powerful and terrifying. The figure stepped into the light, and the world seemed to hold its breath. It was a cat, but not like any Elias had seen in his own time. This predator was low and muscular, its fur the color of sun-baked earth, patterned faintly with darker rosettes that blended perfectly with the tall grass. Its head was broad, its muzzle powerful, and from its mouth protruded two curved canines, long. Ivory blades meant for piercing flesh. A saber-toothed cat. Meschiridus. The hominins froze, their bodies taut with instinctive fear. The largest male stepped forward, his posture rigid, his eyes locked on the predator. The smaller ones clustered behind the females, who crouched low, baring their teeth in a silent threat. Elias crouched deeper into the grass, every muscle tense. He had read about predators of this age, but reading was nothing like standing in the presence of one. The cat moved with liquid grace, each step deliberate, muscles rippling beneath its hide. Its golden eyes flicked between the hominins, assessing, calculating. The air was thick with the scent of tension. Even the river seemed to quiet. The saber-tooth took another step, and another. Then it stopped. The largest hominin let out a deep, guttural sound, a warning, half roar, half bark. He stamped the ground, sending a vibration through the earth. The cat's ears twitched, but it did not retreat. Elias's heart pounded. He knew predators like this could take down prey far larger than these small primates, but they were not without defenses. As if on cue, the second adult male bent to the ground, picking up a stone the size of his palm. With a sudden burst of movement, he hurled it. The rock struck the earth just in front of the cat's paws, sending a spray of dirt into its face. The saber-tooth snarled, its lips peeling back to reveal the full curve of its canines. But instead of lunging, it stepped back. Another stone flew, this one hitting its shoulder with a dull thud. The predator's tail lashed once, twice, then it turned sharply, slipping back into the shadows from which it came. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the tension eased. The hominins let out low, rhythmic sounds, as if reassuring one another. The juveniles clung to their mothers, their small hands gripping fur tightly. Elias exhaled, only then realizing how long he had been holding his breath. The river returned to its gentle murmuring. The insects sang again. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the mist. Life, once more, began to move. The group crossed to a sandbank further downriver. Elias followed from a safe distance, careful to keep the tall grass between them. They stopped near a shallow pool where the water was warm from the sun. One female knelt to drink, cupping her hands, while the juveniles splashed at the edges, chasing small darting fish. 4 hours, Elias watched. He observed how they moved, how they foraged, how they kept constant watch for danger. The adults scanned the trees every few minutes, their heads turning with quick, bird-like motions. As the day wore on, the air grew heavier. Clouds began to gather above the hills, their edges dark with rain. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet earth and distant lightning. The group began to move again, this time toward higher ground. They climbed a slope covered in dense brush, the juveniles staying close to the adults. Elias followed at a careful distance until they reached a plateau dotted with small trees. There, they settled. The females searched the ground for edible roots, using sticks to dig. The largest male climbed partway up a tree, pulling down clusters of small, oval fruit. The juveniles ate greedily, their lips stained with juice. Elias sat beneath a tree at the far edge of the plateau. From here, he could see the valley stretching out below, the river winding like a ribbon through the green. In the far distance, the mountains rose, shrouded in the heavy clouds of the coming storm. Thunder rumbled. The hominins gathered closer together, their bodies touching, forming a loose circle. Elias could feel the change in the air, that charged stillness before the sky breaks. When the rain came, it came hard. The rain fell in thick, silver sheets, drumming against leaves and turning the earth to dark, sticky mud. Each drop struck with a sound that blended into a constant roar, drowning out the distant calls of birds and the hum of insects. The warm scent of wet vegetation filled the air, rich and alive. The hominins huddled beneath the broad canopy of a fig tree, their bodies pressed close for warmth. Water slid down the great twisting branches, spilling in small waterfalls that splashed onto the ground beside them. The juveniles clung to their mothers, their fur plastered flat by the dampness, their eyes wide but calm. Elias crouched beneath a smaller tree several paces away. The rain soaked through his shirt in minutes, chilling his skin, but he didn't mind. He had seen rain 1,000 times in his own life, in cities, on highways, in the quiet of his home, but this was different. This rain carried no scent of asphalt or smoke. It was pure, falling on a world untouched by human hands. Above, flashes of light split the sky, followed by the deep, rolling growl of thunder. The sound vibrated in Elias's chest, as if the earth itself was speaking. The largest male hominin shifted slightly, glancing toward the open slope. His gaze lingered there, alert, watchful. Even in the shelter of the storm, danger could come. Elias followed his eyes. The tall grass swayed under the pounding rain, and for a moment he thought he saw movement, a darker shadow among the green. But it passed, leaving only the endless curtain of falling water. The storm lasted for hours. The plateau's red earth became slick and treacherous. Small rivulets formed, carving thin channels through the ground before spilling over the edge, into the valley below. The air was warm despite the rain, and steam rose from the soaked earth when lightning briefly lit the sky. When the downpour finally eased, the land seemed to exhale. The rain softened to a mist. The clouds began to break, and a pale, golden light returned to the world. Every leaf glistened, and the river below gleamed as if made of molten metal. The hominins emerged from their shelter. The juveniles darted out first, splashing in puddles and chasing each other through the wet grass. One stopped suddenly, staring at the ground, then crouched to pick up a small frog that had ventured from its hiding place. He held it gently for a moment before letting it hop away. The adults set to work. The females moved toward the fig tree's base, collecting fallen fruit that had been loosened by the storm. The males scanned the horizon, their heads turning sharply at the smaller sound. Elias noted the rhythm of their movements. Gather, scan, gather, scan, a balance between survival and sustenance. In the distance, the air was still heavy with rain, and a rainbow arched faintly above the mountains. By late afternoon, the group began moving again, traveling along a narrow ridge that wound toward the deeper forest. Elias followed, careful to place his steps in the softer ground where his tracks would fade quickly. The forest closed around them, taller trees here, their trunks dark and slick, their roots twisting like frozen rivers. Ferns the size of small cars crowded the undergrowth, their fronds heavy with droplets. Somewhere high above, a bird called in a slow, haunting tone. Elias felt the temperature drop as the canopy thickened. Sunlight filtered through in narrow shafts, each one a column of dust and mist. The sound of the outside world faded until only the drip of water and the occasional rustle of leaves remained. The hominins moved with a confidence that came from generations of knowing this place. They stepped over roots without looking, paused at trees where edible insects might hide, and avoided patches of ground where the mud was too soft. As the light dimmed, they came to a shallow cave in the side of a limestone outcrop. It was dry inside, smelling faintly of old earth and damp stone. The floor was smooth, worn by years of sheltering life. The group entered without hesitation. The juveniles curled against the adults, small bodies fitting into larger ones with practiced ease. One of the males sat near the entrance, his back straight, his eyes scanning the forest beyond. Elias remained outside, hidden behind a curtain of ferns. He knew he could not enter. This was their home for the night. Instead, he found a place beneath an overhanging rock, where he could watch the cave and the forest both. As night fell, the forest awoke. Night settled over the plateau like a slow-moving tide, deepening the shadows until the forest was swallowed whole. The last traces of daylight clung stubbornly to the western horizon, fading to indigo before vanishing entirely. Above, the sky opened to reveal a scatter of stars, sharper and more brilliant than Elias had ever seen in his own time. With no cities to drown them in light, they burned like small fires against the black. The forest's voice changed with the darkness. The steady daytime chorus of insects softened, replaced by the calls of night creatures, long, drawn-out whistles, quick staccato chirps, and the low, rhythmic thrum of something unseen. Occasionally, a branch cracked in the distance, the sound carrying unnaturally far in the still air. From his place beneath the overhanging rock, Elias could see the mouth of the cave, a dark oval in the pale stone. Inside, the silhouettes of the hominins shifted as they settled into sleep. The male who had taken watch at the entrance remained alert, his head turning slowly from side to side. Every so often, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond, his muscles tensing before he relaxed again. The air cooled quickly, and a faint mist began to creep along the ground. Elias pulled his jacket tighter, feeling the dampness seep into the fabric. The scent of the forest at night was different, earthier, heavier, tinged with the musk of nocturnal animals on the move. A sudden rustle to his left froze him in place. Something moved between the ferns, low to the ground. The sound of wet leaves brushing against fur. Elias held his breath. From the shadows emerged a small creature, a prehistoric relative of the civet, with sleek spotted fur and wide, luminous eyes. It paused, staring at him with a mix of curiosity and caution, before slipping silently into the undergrowth. For a while, nothing disturbed the quiet rhythm of the night. Then, far off in the valley below, came a sound that raised the hairs on the back of his neck, a long, mournful cry, deep and resonant, echoing across the hills. The watchful male at the cave entrance straightened, his head snapping toward the sound. Even the sleeping figures inside stirred. The cry came again, closer this time. Elias recognized it from his research, the call of Dinophilis, another saber-toothed predator, smaller than Mechirodus but no less deadly. Unlike the larger cats, this one hunted under the cover of darkness. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The insects fell silent. The only sound was the soft drip of water from the leaves. Minutes passed. Then a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing, low, powerful, and silent. The watcher at the cave let out a sharp, guttural sound, waking the others. In an instant, the adults were on their feet, the juveniles gathered between them. No one ran. Running could trigger the predator's chase. Instead, they stood their ground. A tight cluster of bodies, their eyes locked on the darkness. The shadow paused. Elias could make out the faint gleam of eyeshine, the slow shift of weight as the cat measured its chances. Then, with a flick of its tail, it slipped back into the forest, melting into the night as though it had never been there. The hominins did not relax immediately. They remained alert for a long time, listening, scenting the air, before gradually returning to their resting places. The watcher resumed his post at the cave entrance, his gaze unwavering. Elias let out the breath he'd been holding. He knew the danger was real, one misstep, and the balance of life here could shift in an instant. But he also felt a strange calm. These creatures, his distant ancestors, had survived nights like this for generations. They knew this world in a way he never could. Somewhere in the forest, an owl-like bird called, its voice soft and haunting. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, and the night deepened. The night held steady, thick, and unmoving, as if the forest itself had gone still after the predator's retreat. Elias remained tucked beneath the rock overhang, his eyes adjusting to the shades of black and silver that defined the world. After sundown, the air was cool and heavy, each breath carrying the scent of damp moss and rich earth. From the cave came the slow, measured breathing of the resting hominins, broken only by the occasional soft murmur, a sound halfway between speech and dream. The watcher at the entrance stayed upright, his silhouette a dark shape against the faint glimmer of the open clearing. Every so often, he shifted, leaning forward slightly as though listening to a sound Elias couldn't hear. Above, the stars wheeled silently, and a thin crescent moon slipped between clouds. Its pale light fell in broken shafts through the canopy, catching the edges of wet leaves and glistening in scattered droplets. In that light, the forest seemed almost frozen, its stillness masking 100 unseen movements. A faint rustle broke the quiet. Elias turned his head toward the sound, scanning the tangle of undergrowth. It was small, deliberate, not the heavy tread of a predator, but the cautious steps of something lighter. Moments later, a small, rabbit-like creature emerged, its fur dark and its ears long and twitching. It paused, nose quivering, before nibbling on a patch of tender shoots. A soft snap of a twig sent it bounding away, disappearing into the shadows. The forest was full of such fleeting lives. Elias felt the truth of it settle into him. This world was built on countless moments like this. Unseen, unnoticed, but vital. Time passed slowly. The distant cries of nocturnal hunters echoed now and then, but none came near the plateau. The soft hum of insects returned, weaving through the still air like a quiet song. Elias fought the pull of sleep. He knew he had to remain awake if he wanted to truly witness this night. Every flicker of movement, every shift in sound was a piece of the past he had come to find. In the deepest hours, the temperature dropped further, and a fine mist began to rise from the damp earth. It curled along the ground, creeping through the grass and pooling in low places. The mist caught the moonlight, glowing faintly, making the clearing seem like a place caught between worlds. Inside the cave, the youngest juvenile stirred, letting out a soft whimper. One of the females shifted toward it, wrapping an arm around the small body and pulling it close. The movement was instinctive, protective, and tender. Elias felt a pang, a reminder of the threads that connected them. Across millions of years. Far off, on the other side of the valley, the haunting call of Dinophilis rose again. This time it was fainter. Perhaps the predator had moved on, following other prey. The watcher relaxed slightly, though his eyes never left the darkness beyond. The hours stretched. Elias's muscles ached from sitting so long, but he didn't move. He could hear the faint drip of water from the cave's roof, the occasional shift of a body inside, the distant murmur of the river far below. At last, the sky began to change. The black softened to deep blue. The first hint of dawn brushed the eastern horizon with a pale, cold light. The stars faded one by one, their glow swallowed by the coming day. The forest stirred. Birds began to call, tentative at first, then louder, layering their voices into a chorus. The insects shifted their song, a subtle but distinct change in the rhythm of life. The watcher at the cave entrance straightened and gave a low, throaty sound. The others began to wake, stretching, shaking out their limbs, and glancing toward the lightening sky. The juveniles clung briefly to their mothers, before beginning to explore the cave mouth, their eyes wide with curiosity. Elias shifted, feeling the ache in his knees as he prepared to move again. Another day was beginning in this world of raw earth and untamed life, and somewhere, out beyond the rising mist, the past waited for him to follow. The sun crept above the horizon, its first rays spilling across the plateau in soft gold. Dew clung to every blade of grass, glittering as though the land had been scattered with diamonds. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet leaves and fresh earth, a reminder of the storm that had passed the day before. The hominins emerged fully from the cave, their movements unhurried but purposeful. The largest male led the way down from the limestone outcrop, pausing often to scan the valley below. The others followed, the juveniles staying close to the adults, their small hands brushing against arms and legs for reassurance. Elias trailed at a careful distance, stepping lightly to avoid snapping twigs underfoot. He kept to the shadows where possible, letting the early light guide him rather than stepping openly into it. The group descended along a narrow path carved by generations of feet, not just their own kind, but also deer-like antelopes, small boars, and other creatures that roamed this part of the ancient world. As they reached the valley floor, the sound of the river grew louder. Morning mist still clung to the water surface, curling in ghostly ribbons that drifted with the slow current. Birds swooped low over the water, their long wings slicing through the fog before they rose again, calling in sharp, clear notes. The hominins moved to the water's edge. Two females knelt and drank directly from the river, their hands scooping the cool liquid into their mouths. The largest male waded into the shallows, scanning for movement below the surface. Within moments, he lunged, his hands breaking the water with a splash, and came up holding a writhing fish. The juveniles let out quick, excited sounds, bouncing on their heels as the catch was brought to shore. They ate there on the bank, sharing the fish among them in small pieces. Elias stayed hidden behind a stand of reeds, watching. He could hear the wet tearing of flesh, the soft grunts of satisfaction. There was no fire, no cooking, just raw sustenance, as it had been for millions of years. When they were finished, the group moved away from the river, heading toward an open stretch of grassland. Here, the sun had begun to warm the earth, and the scent of flowering plants drifted on the breeze. Insects darted between the blooms, and somewhere nearby, the low buzz of bees echoed faintly. The largest male stopped suddenly, his head turning toward the far side of the grassland. Elias followed his gaze and spotted movement, a small herd of grazing creatures, their bodies covered in short, reddish-brown fur, with curved horns sweeping back from their heads. They were wary, ears flicking at every sound, tails twitching. The hominins approached slowly, not to hunt but to forage in the same area. They crouched to dig for tubers, pulling the pale roots from the soil and brushing off the dirt before biting into them. The herd kept its distance, watching with dark, alert eyes. Elias knelt in the grass, noting how the morning light caught on every movement, how even the smallest shift in the wind carried new scents and sounds. This was a world without the constant hum of machines, without the interruption of human voices. Every noise mattered. Every scent told a story. By midday, the sun was high, and the heat settled heavily over the valley. The group sought shade beneath a cluster of acacia trees, their wide, flat canopies filtering the harsh light into shifting patterns on the ground. The juveniles dozed in the dappled shade while the adults sat quietly, occasionally grooming one another, picking through fur for small insects. Elias stayed on the edge of the shade, feeling the pull of the quiet. The rhythm of life here was slower, deliberate. No moment was wasted, but no moment was rushed. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily on the thermals, its shadow gliding over the grass below. The air shimmered with heat, but beyond the stillness, there was movement, far off, near the line where the forest met the plain. Something large, dark, and slow was emerging from the trees. The hominins noticed it too. The shape moved with a slow, deliberate gait, each step sinking into the soft edge of the grassland. At first, the distance blurred its details, but as it drew closer, the sunlight caught its massive frame. Elias's breath caught. It was a giant, not human, but a colossus of the animal world. Its back rose higher than any man's head, covered in thick, wrinkled hide the color of weathered stone. A long, muscular trunk swung lazily before it, testing the air. Its tusks curved outward, pale and gleaming against the shadow of its massive head. An ancient proboscidean, a distant ancestor of elephants. Not the mammoths that would come later, but something older, stegodont. The hominins watched in stillness, their bodies tense but not afraid. This was no predator. Still, they kept their distance, for the weight of such a creature could crush without intent, and its tusks were capable of shattering trees. The stegodont moved into the grassland, tearing at the vegetation with its trunk. It stripped leaves from low branches, pulled up clumps of grass, and tossed them into its mouth with a slow, rhythmic motion. The herd of grazing antelopes drifted farther away, giving the giant a wide berth. Elias crouched low, barely breathing. He could hear it even from here, the soft tearing of plants, the huff of breath, the occasional low rumble that vibrated through the ground. The smell was strong too, a mix of damp hide, earth, and crushed greenery. For a long while, the scene was peaceful, almost hypnotic. The hominins resumed their quiet foraging beneath the acacias, keeping one eye on the massive visitor. The juveniles peeked out from behind the adults, their small faces filled with wide-eyed wonder. But then the stegodont paused, its trunk curling tightly, lifting high into the air. Its massive ears flared. From the forest's edge, another sound rolled out, low, guttural, and sharp enough to cut through the heavy afternoon heat. Elias felt the hairs on his neck rise. He knew that sound. It was the same predator's call he had heard on the plateau at night, Dinophilis. The giant turned slightly, positioning itself so that its tusks faced the direction of the call. The hominins grew still again, scanning the grassland. Even the insects seemed to quiet. The predator did not appear. Perhaps it had caught sight of the giant and thought better of approaching. Slowly, the stegodont lowered its trunk and resumed feeding, though its ears twitched with every rustle from the forest. The hominins began to move, leaving the open plain and heading toward the shelter of thicker brush. Elias followed, the heat pressing against his back as he stepped from one patch of shadow to another. By late afternoon, they reached a cluster of tall shrubs heavy with small, dark berries. The adults began plucking them, tasting each before offering some to the juveniles. Their fingers were quick and precise, choosing only the ripest fruit. Elias watched from a low rise, noting how the deep purple juice stained their lips and fingers. Overhead, the sky shifted. The golden light of afternoon softened, the air cooling slightly as long shadows stretched across the valley. Somewhere nearby, a pair of large birds took flight, their wings heavy against the air. The hominins seemed to sense the change in the day. They gathered what they could carry, tucking berries and roots into woven slings made from long grass. Then they began the trek back toward higher ground, their pace steady but unhurried. Elias followed until they reached the base of a rocky hill dotted with hardy shrubs. From here, the view of the valley was vast, the river glinting in the last of the sunlight, the forest stretching into the hazy distance. The group found a shallow alcove in the rock face, shaded and sheltered from the wind. The juveniles collapsed into the soft earth, chewing lazily on the berries they had carried. The adults sat near the entrance, scanning the land below with calm, steady eyes. As the first cool breath of evening drifted up from the valley, the sounds of the forest began to change again. The day was ending, and with it, the world shifted to its nighttime rhythm. And somewhere beyond the fading light, the unseen hunters stirred. The first stars appeared in the bruised purple sky, faint at first, like pinpricks through a darkening veil. A sliver of moon rose low over the distant forest, its pale light spilling silver across the river surface. The hominins settled deeper into the alcove. The juveniles huddled together, their small bodies radiating warmth. One female wrapped her long arms around them, her slow rocking motion lulling them toward sleep. The largest male sat near the edge, his profile cut in sharp shadow against the fading light, his gaze fixed on the valley below. Elias remained farther back in the brush, careful not to disturb their rhythm. The evening air was cooler now, carrying the scent of crushed leaves and the faint musk of animals moving unseen. From somewhere deep in the forest, a low, rolling call echoed, not the sharp cry of a predator, but the distant voice of another stegodont, answering across the miles. The sound rumbled through the earth, as if the land itself had spoken. As darkness took hold, the world seemed to tighten. Every rustle in the grass, every wing beat overhead was sharper, more defined. In the distance, a hyena-like laugh rose and fell, followed by the abrupt silence of prey freezing mid-step. The hominins shifted closer to one another. The largest male picked up a long, heavy branch from the ground, turning it in his hands as though testing its weight. The first true threat of the night came quietly. A shape moved at the base of the slope, its outline low and sleek. Moonlight caught on its fur, pale gold, with darker patches that seemed to dissolve into the shadows. It paused, its head lifting, nostrils flaring. Dinophilis. Elias's breath stilled. The cat was alone, but even a single one was dangerous. Its eyes reflected the moonlight in twin glints, unblinking. It stepped forward, soundless on the dry earth, weaving between the shrubs. The largest male hominin rose to his full height, the branch held across his body. He let out a low, guttural sound, a warning that was more growl than voice. Behind him, the others pressed close together, the juveniles gripping arms and fur. The predator froze, its muscles coiled. For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, with a flick of its tail, the Dinophilis turned away, slipping back into the dark as silently as it had come. Only when its golden shape had melted entirely into the night did the group relax. Elias exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his shoulders. But the encounter had shifted the night's mood. Sleep, for most of them, would come lightly. Hours passed. The moon climbed higher, painting the valley in silver and shadow. The night chorus rose, frogs calling from the riverbanks, insects trilling in the grass, the occasional flap of wings as night birds hunted. Elias watched the sky, where the constellations wheeled slowly overhead. The same stars his own world knew, though younger now, untouched by centuries of navigation and naming. With a powerful bound, it turned away from the hominins, vanishing into the trees toward the noise. The undergrowth shuddered, and then it was gone. The group remained still for a long while, listening. Only when the forest's usual rhythm began to return, the insect hum, the bird calls, did they begin to move again. They pressed deeper into the forest, this time more cautious. The light dimmed further, and the air grew warmer, heavy with the scent of blooming flowers somewhere unseen. Eventually, they reached a clearing where a massive tree had fallen, tearing open the canopy and flooding the space with sunlight. Here, plants flourished in dense, bright clusters. The hominins gathered ripe fruit from the bushes and broke open nuts on flat stones. Elias sat at the edge of the clearing, letting the sun's warmth sink into his skin. He could still feel the weight of the predator's gaze, the electric awareness of being prey. In this world, survival was not a moment-to-moment choice. It was the only constant. The midday heat pressed down on the clearing, thick and unyielding. The hominins lingered in the patch of sunlight, where the fallen tree had torn open the sky, their bellies full from the feast of fruit and nuts. Flies buzzed lazily around the sweet-smelling rinds discarded on the ground. The largest male rested against the trunk, his branch laid across his knees. A few of the juveniles dozed beside him, while others tugged at vines hanging from the exposed canopy. It was the smallest female who heard it first, a faint, irregular rustle in the undergrowth beyond the far edge of the clearing. Her head turned sharply, eyes narrowing. She made a low sound, soft but urgent. The largest male straightened, scanning the shadows. The others followed his gaze. The rustle grew louder, and with it came a low murmur, the unmistakable sound of voices. Not the calls of birds or the grunts of forest pigs, but something deeper, closer to their own. From the shadows, shapes emerged. They were like the group in form, upright, long-armed. Their faces framed by the same heavy brow and strong jaw, but their scent, their movement, was unfamiliar. Another band of hominins. The newcomers numbered at least 10. They stepped into the light in a loose formation. Their leader, a broad-shouldered male with a scar down his cheek, walking at the front. In his hand he carried a thick length of wood, worn smooth at the grip. The clearing held its breath. For a moment, no one moved. The two bands stared at each other across the fallen tree, the air tense with unspoken calculation. Then the scarred male made a low, throaty sound. It wasn't a greeting. It was a claim. His eyes swept over the fruit-strewn ground, the sunlight pooling at their feet, and his chin lifted slightly. This space, his posture said, belonged to them now. The largest male of Elias's group rose to his full height. His chest expanded, and his own voice rolled out in a deep, resonant growl. The juveniles gathered behind him, peeking out from between adult legs. The scarred male took a step forward. One of his females moved to his side, clutching a stone in her fist. Another male from his group circled slightly to the left, testing the space between the bands. Elias felt the shift, the moment before a clash, the taut thread of aggression drawn tight. His own body tensed, even though he knew he could not interfere. The largest male from his group struck first, not with a blow, but with a sound, a sharp, sudden bark that cut through the clearing. It was followed by a display, arms raised high, chest pounded with open palms, body swaying in a deliberate, intimidating rhythm. The scarred male responded in kind, his voice rising, his body expanding to fill the space. The two of them moved closer, their faces inches apart, teeth bared in primal defiance. Around them, the others shifted, some crouching, ready to spring, others gripping branches or stones. The tension thickened until the air itself seemed to strain. And then, without warning, the scarred male lunged. The clash was sudden and violent. The two leaders collided, hands gripping, bodies twisting. Their feet kicked up dirt as they fought for balance. Around them, the clearing erupted into chaos, shouts, the thud of wood against wood, the scramble of bodies pushing and grappling. Elias's heart pounded as he tracked the largest male. The fight was raw, without technique, but every movement carried the full weight of survival. A sharp blow from the scarred male's branch caught the side of his opponent's head, but the largest male responded, with a shove that sent the other stumbling back into the sunlit grass. For a moment, it seemed neither would yield. Then one of the juveniles from Elias's group cried out, a high, frightened sound. The largest male's head snapped toward the noise, his focus breaking for a fraction of a second. The scarred male lunged again, but this time the largest male sidestepped, twisting the attack away. He made a sound then, loud, forceful, final. A warning that was not a threat, but a command to leave. His band echoed it, their voices rising in unison. The scarred male hesitated, breathing hard, chest heaving. His eyes flicked over the group, then back to the largest male. Slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back. One by one, his band followed, their shapes melting back into the shadowed forest. When they were gone, the clearing was silent again, save for the ragged sound of breathing. The largest male lowered his branch and glanced at the juveniles, checking each one. No one was seriously hurt. Elias exhaled. The sun had shifted, and the light in the clearing was already fading. Whatever rest they had found here was over. The group gathered what little remained of the fruit and began to move on, leaving the fallen tree behind. The forest swallowed their tracks, and the air slowly returned to its normal rhythm. But the scent of the other band lingered, a reminder that danger came not only on four legs, but on two. The air inside the forest had grown thick and restless. Every sound, the flutter of wings, the crack of a branch, carried the weight of possible danger. The largest male led the way, setting a steady pace, his eyes always scanning ahead. The canopy began to thin. Shafts of unbroken sunlight pierced the shadows, painting the path in gold. Gradually, the towering trees gave way to smaller shrubs and patches of tall grass. The ground underfoot shifted from damp earth to firmer, drier soil. And then, with a final push through the last fringe of tangled brush, the world opened. The forest ended abruptly at the edge of a vast savanna. The grassland stretched toward the horizon in every direction, rolling under the weight of the sun. Isolated trees stood like watchtowers in the distance, their canopies wide and flat. The wind here was different, drier, carrying the scent of dust and distant rain. It moved the tall grass in long, slow waves, revealing glimpses of what lay hidden, herds of antelope grazing, their heads snapping up at the faintest sound, flocks of ground birds scurrying between clumps of green, and, far off, the dark silhouettes of much larger shapes moving steadily across the plain. The hominins hesitated at the forest's edge. Here, there was no cover. Every movement would be visible, every step exposed to eyes that might watch from far away. The largest male sniffed the air, then stepped forward, leading the group into the grassland. The juveniles stayed close to the center of the formation, their heads swiveling constantly. The sun beat down without mercy. Within minutes, their backs glistened with sweat, and the sound of insects grew louder. Heat shimmered over the grass, making the distant trees waver like ghosts. As they moved, Elias's gaze swept across the savanna. Life here was concentrated in pockets. A cluster of zebra-like grazers by a waterhole. A small group of shaggy-coated rhinoceros chewing lazily on low shrubs. Above, vultures circled slowly, riding invisible currents of air. A sudden ripple of motion caught his attention. To the right, a small herd of gazelle-like creatures froze, their ears twitching. A moment later, they exploded into a full sprint, vanishing into the tall grass. The cause appeared seconds later, a pair of large, lean cats moving low to the ground. They were not the forest and bushes of before. These were built for speed, their bodies long and their limbs powerful. Cheetah-like, but heavier, their eyes locked on a single fleeing target. The hominin stopped, watching the chase unfold. The predator's stride was liquid, effortless, eating the distance between it and the gazelle. Within moments, the gap closed, and the cat struck, a cloud of dust. A sharp cry, and then stillness. The hunters fed quickly, tearing into their kill. The group gave them a wide berth, skirting far to the left before continuing. By late afternoon, the sun's heat began to soften. The wind shifted, cooler now, and brought with it a faint scent of water. The largest male adjusted their path toward it. They reached the waterhole just as the light began to change, the sky deepening toward amber. The place was alive. Elephants with straight, tusk-like teeth waded into the shallows, their massive trunks sweeping water over their backs. Small birds darted in to snatch insects from the surface. Crocodiles floated motionless near the far bank, their eyes breaking the water like dark beads. The hominins approached cautiously, keeping to the downwind side. They knelt at the muddy edge, scooping water into their mouths, always watching the crocodiles. One juvenile wandered too close, and the largest male yanked him back with a sharp bark of warning. When they had drunk their fill, they moved to a nearby cluster of acacia trees. The branches were thorned, but offered some protection from predators. Here, they settled for the night. Elias sat in the cooling air, watching as the sky bled into deep purple. Far across the grassland, a lion's roar rolled through the dusk, long, low, and final. The sound drew an answering call from somewhere behind them. Predators ruled here too, but their domain was vast, and darkness would decide who hunted and who hid. The hominins pressed close together beneath the acacia, their breathing steadying. In the distance, the last glow of the sun faded, leaving the savannah under the slow-rising watch of the stars. The savannah night fell fast. One moment, the acacia branches glowed faintly in the last traces of sunset. The next, darkness settled over the grasslands like a heavy blanket. The air cooled, carrying a sharper edge, and the wind carried scents more distinct now: musk, damp earth, and the faint, iron tang of fresh kill somewhere far off. The group huddled close under the thorny canopy. The largest male sat at the edge, his eyes fixed outward, his branch in hand. Beyond him, the tall grass swayed in slow, ghost-like movements, each one a question in the dark. Elias could hear the night come alive. Insects sang in a constant, high-pitched chorus. A distant jackal yipped. The deep, resonant croak of a bullfrog echoed from the waterhole. And beneath it all, somewhere on the wind, came the low pulse of footsteps. Not the scattered sound of small creatures. Moving through grass, this was heavier. Deliberate. It paused, then resumed. The largest male stiffened. He let out a low grunt, and the others stirred. A few juveniles pressed themselves deeper into the safety of the group, their small hands clutching the older female's fur. From the darkness, a pair of eyes caught the starlight. They hovered low, moving in a slow arc around the acacia. Then another pair appeared. And another. Hyenas. There were at least 4, shapes barely visible in the dark. Their outlines thick-shouldered and sloped, their heads carried low. The sound of their padded feet whispered through the grass as they circled. One of them gave a short, sharp whoop, a sound that broke the night and was answered by another call from further away. The largest male stood, raising his branch high. He barked once, loud and deep. The band echoed him with their own shouts, a chorus of warning. The hyenas slowed, but did not retreat. Their heads tilted, their eyes unblinking. Elias could see the largest of them, a scarred female, her muzzle pale with age. She stepped closer than the rest, stopping just beyond the reach of the acacia's thorns. Her jaws opened in a wide, slow yawn that revealed the crushing power of her teeth. The largest male took a step forward and slammed his branch against the ground. The thud rolled through the roots of the tree, sending dust into the air. The hyena female flinched back a step, but then began to circle again. The others followed her lead. The night stretched thin with tension. The group could not move. Leaving the tree's protection would be suicide. But neither could they rest. For what felt like hours, the hyenas tested them. A shape would dart forward, jaws snapping just short of the thorns, then retreat. Another would creep in from the opposite side, sniffing the air, gauging the distance. Each time, the largest male was there, his branch swinging, his voice sharp. Finally, as the moon lifted higher, painting the grass silver, the hyenas began to lose interest. One by one, they melted back into the night, their shapes dissolving into the endless sway of the grass. The last to leave was the scarred female, her eyes lingering a moment longer before she too vanished. The group's tension eased, but no one truly slept. The night was too open, too thin between them and the dangers it held. When the first pale light of dawn touched the horizon, the largest male signaled for them to move. They left the acacia grove quickly, their steps light, their heads turning constantly. The grass was still wet with dew, and in the distance, wildebeest grazed in tight clusters. Overhead, vultures wheeled, marking another kill somewhere far away. The savannah was beautiful in the morning, the gold of the grass catching the sun, the air fresh with the scent of rain that had yet to come. But beauty here was never separate from danger. Every step forward was both an opportunity and a risk. By mid-morning, the group had found a patch of low shrubs heavy with small, tart berries. The females and juveniles began to feed, while the largest male and another adult kept watch from a rise nearby. Elias followed their gaze and saw what they had already sensed, dust on the horizon. Faint but moving. Something was approaching. The dust rose like a pale curtain against the blue morning sky. At first it seemed far away, but with each passing moment the haze thickened, rolling toward them in slow, deliberate waves. The largest male lowered himself slightly, scanning the horizon. His nostrils flared as the wind shifted, bringing with it a deep, earthy scent, dry grass, animal musk, and the faint ammonia tang of dung. The ground trembled, just barely at first. Then again, a steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the land itself. From beyond the shimmer of heat, they came. The herd was enormous, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of heavy-bodied creatures with long, sweeping horns and dark hides slick with dust. Wildebeest. They moved as one, hooves drumming the ground in a constant, thunderous rhythm. The sound filled the air until it was no longer just heard, but felt in the chest, in the bones. The juveniles clung to their mothers, eyes wide at the living tide before them. The largest male stood at full height now, watching not with fear, but calculation. Herds like this meant two things: food and danger. They grazed and moved in waves, their mass covering the land like a shifting carpet. In their wake followed opportunity, scavengers and predators both, drawn to the weakest and the fallen. For the hominins, a carcass meant meat, marrow, fat, life. But it also meant competition with creatures far stronger and faster than themselves. The group began to shadow the herd from a safe distance, keeping downwind. The grass here was flattened under countless hooves. The earth churned and scattered with droppings. Birds followed overhead, darting down to snatch insects stirred up by the movement. As the sun climbed higher, the heat pressed hard. The herd slowed near a wide, shallow river, its surface muddy and crowded with thirsty animals. The wildebeest waded in, heads low, tails flicking at biting flies. The hominins held back, gathering in the shade of a lone tree. The river was a place of abundance, but also of ambush. From their vantage, Elias saw what the largest male already knew. In the far bend of the river, where the bank dipped low, a ripple disturbed the still water. Another, then the faint curve of a ridge. Back broke the surface. Crocodiles. The herd drank cautiously, pushing forward in waves. Occasionally, one would bolt backward, startled by a sudden movement in the water. The hominins waited. They were patient, not for the kill, but for what followed it. It came in a flash. One wildebeest, smaller than the rest, stepped too deep. The water exploded. A massive crocodile surged upward, its jaws closing over the animal's head. The wildebeest thrashed, hooves kicking wildly. But the predator rolled, dragging it under in a violent spiral. The water churned red, then stilled. The herd panicked, surging away from the riverbank in a chaotic wave. The largest male barked once, sharp and urgent. The group moved fast. Not toward the kill in the water. That belonged to the crocodile. But along the edge of the retreating herd. There, in the churn of hooves and dust, a weaker wildebeest had stumbled. Its leg bent wrong, a fracture from the stampede. The animal tried to rise, but its strength was gone. The largest male approached cautiously, branch in hand. He made a quick, decisive strike to the back of its skull. The wildebeest collapsed, still. The females moved in immediately, working with practiced skill. Stone flake struck bone, slicing through hide. The rich scent of fresh meat filled the air. They worked fast, tearing away strips of flesh, prying at the ribs for fat and organs. Overhead, vultures began to gather, their shadows wheeling on the grass. And beyond them, on the far edge of the savannah, a darker shape appeared, moving low, steady, and straight toward them. The largest male saw it at the same moment Elias did. His voice was low but urgent, calling the group to pull back. The shape closed the distance quickly. It was a lioness, lean and scarred, her eyes locked on the kill. The hominins grabbed what they could carry and retreated toward the cover of the nearest thorn grove. The lioness broke into a run, her paws silent on the trampled earth. She reached the carcass within seconds, her head lowering immediately to feed. From the safety of the grove, the hominins watched. They had lost the rest of the meat, but not before taking enough to last for days. The largest male tore a strip of flesh with his teeth, the taste rich and heavy on the tongue. Around him, the others fed, their faces streaked with red. Survival here was never clean, never without cost, but tonight, they would not go hungry. The air changed before the sky did. It began with a stillness, the kind that makes every creature pause. The insects quieted. The distant birds vanished into the trees. Even the grass, so often restless with wind, stood still and tall. The largest male lifted his head. His nostrils flared at the scent on the air, sharp, metallic, heavy. It was the smell of rain, though no drop had yet fallen. On the far horizon, a thin bruise of cloud stretched from one edge of the land to the other. It was growing. The group lingered in the thorn grove, their bellies heavy with meat, their faces marked with the day's labor. The lioness was still at the carcass in the open field, her tail twitching as she fed. But even she lifted her head now, scanning the horizon. The sky darkened with unnatural speed. The sun became a pale, smudged disk behind the growing wall of cloud. The wind returned suddenly, cool and violent, bending the tall grass in rippling waves. A low, rolling sound followed, not the cry of any living thing, but the deep voice of the earth's own sky. Thunder. The juveniles whined, clinging to their mother's sides. The largest male barked twice and began to move. The grove offered little shelter from what was coming. They needed the rock overhang, the one they had used many nights ago, when the leopard prowled. The air was thick now, each breath damp with the promise of rain. The scent was stronger, almost overwhelming. Lightning cracked open the sky. For an instant, the savannah glowed in stark white light, every blade of grass, every wrinkle of bark etched in perfect detail. Then darkness rushed back, and the thunder hit like a physical force, rolling across the land. The group moved quickly, but the open ground between them and the rocks felt longer than it ever had. The wind tore at them, lifting dust and debris into stinging clouds. The horizon was no longer visible, only the wall of rain rushing toward them, a grey curtain swallowing the land. The first drops hit hard, cold against the skin. Then came the downpour. It was not gentle. The rain struck in sheets, drumming against their backs, soaking fur and skin alike. The ground turned slick underfoot, mud sucking at their toes. The air roared with the sound of water. They reached the overhang just as the worst of it struck. The rock face rose like a wall, its lip jutting far enough to keep the ground beneath mostly dry. The group crowded inside, shivering but safe from the direct force of the rain. From this shelter, they watched the savannah transform. The grass bent flat under the weight of the storm. Small streams formed almost instantly, rushing between clumps of shrubs, carrying bits of leaves and soil. Lightning flashed again, followed by another booming report of thunder. Elias felt the primal mix of fear and awe that such storms commanded. Here, in this time, there was no roof, no fire, no barrier against nature's moods. Only the land, the sky, and the instinct to endure. Hours passed. The rain did not relent. Even the predators had vanished from view, seeking whatever shelter they could find. The smell of wet earth and crushed vegetation filled the air, heavy and raw. When at last the storm began to fade, the world was different. The dust that had hung for weeks was gone, replaced by the smell of freshness. The river, which had been low, now surged, its muddy water pushing hard against the banks. The group emerged cautiously. The grass shimmered with droplets. Small animals ventured out. A hare, shaking itself free of water, darted between shrubs. Birds returned, calling from the treetops. The storm had not only washed the land, it had reset it. For the hominins, it meant change. The fresh growth would draw grazers in new patterns. Water would be abundant, but so would mud, making some paths treacherous. And where prey gathered, predators would follow. The largest male stood scanning the distance. Somewhere out there, the next challenge waited. The swollen river pulled at the land with a restless force, its muddy surface swirling with broken branches, torn grass, and the occasional shape of something dead carried from far upstream. The roar of it was constant, deep, and hungry. The group followed its curve at a cautious distance. The largest male led, stepping where the mud was firmest, avoiding the slick patches that could pull a foot down like a trap. The air was heavy with the smell of wet clay and churned vegetation. Every so often, the water shifted strangely, a swirl too sudden, a shape too smooth to be debris. The others noticed it too. Crocodiles had been displaced from their usual haunts by the flood. Here, they could be anywhere. But there was something else in the water today. The first sign was the sound, a short, sharp burst like a heavy breath forced through wet nostrils. Then, a dark hump broke the surface, rising and sinking again with surprising grace for such size. The water churned in its wake. The females froze. The juveniles were pulled close, eyes wide. Another hump surfaced, then another. And then the head rose. It was massive, blunt-muzzled, with eyes set high, nostrils flaring. Its ears twitched in the rain-soft air. A hippo. It was not alone. Two more surfaced nearby, their skin slick and glistening in the dull light. They were restless, snapping at floating debris, grunting deep in their throats. The swollen river had likely forced them from calmer waters. And here, they were on edge. The largest male motioned for the group to move higher up the bank, away from the water line. Hippos were not predators, but they were killers all the same. Nothing that large and short-tempered could be taken lightly. They pressed on, staying parallel to the river but giving it space. The land here sloped downward into pockets where the water had overflowed, trapping small fish and amphibians in shallow pools. A few of the juveniles stopped to snatch at them, quick hands scooping flashing silver bodies into eager mouths. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, carried on the damp air, a sharp, almost sweet rot, the kind that drew flies in swarming clouds. The largest male sniffed once, then twice, his brow tightening. They found it just ahead, caught in a tangle of reeds where the floodwater had receded. A young antelope, its hind leg broken, ribs showing where scavengers had already fed. But it was still alive, its sides heaving, eyes rolling in fear. The females moved forward, stone tools in hand. One quick strike ended its struggle. The group worked fast, stripping meat and cracking small bones for marrow. The sound of splintering bone carried over the rushing of the river. That sound brought trouble. From the far side of the river, a shadow emerged between the trees. Large, dark. and moving with the deliberate silence of something that knew exactly what it wanted. It stepped into view, and the air seemed to change. A cat, but not like the lions they had seen before. This one was larger in the shoulders, heavier in the forelimbs, with a head that looked almost too big for its body. The teeth, long and curved, glinted pale even at this distance. Elias had seen drawings of them in museums, but never alive. A saber-toothed cat. It watched them from across the swollen river, its tail flicking slowly. The water between them was violent and deep, but the cat did not look deterred. It paced a few steps one way, then the other, testing the bank for a crossing. The largest male barked softly, urging the group to gather what they could and move. They obeyed, but the sense of being watched did not fade. The cat followed their movement along the opposite bank, always keeping parallel. It was patient. Predators here could afford to be. Sooner or later, the water would drop or the group would make a mistake. By the time the sky began to dim toward evening, the cat had vanished into the tree line. But its absence did not bring relief, only the certainty that it was still out there, somewhere, waiting. The light bled out of the sky quickly. First the colors went, the golden shine on the grass fading into muted browns, the gray of the swollen river deepening until it was almost black. Then the shapes began to blur, the edges of the world softening as the sun sank beyond the horizon. The group had not moved far from the river. The banks on either side rose into muddy slopes, and behind them the land was thick with trees, tangled roots, and thorns that made travel in the dark dangerous. It was safer to stay put, even with the memory of the cat's eyes still fresh in their minds. They chose a stand of small acacia trees a short distance from the water. The branches were low, the ground beneath relatively dry. The largest male and two of the females gathered dry sticks and leaves, arranging them into a pile. They had no fire, not yet. Not in this time, but the scent of the dry leaves masked their smell, and the crunch beneath foot would warn them if anything approached. The river spoke endlessly beside them, its rushing filling the night air. But underneath it, Elias could still hear other sounds, the chirp of frogs in the shallows, the hum of insects, the occasional splash of something moving in the water. And then, faint but certain, the snap of a branch. Heads lifted instantly, ears tilted. The sound had come from the tree line opposite the riverbank. In the darkness there was nothing to see, only the void between the trunks. But Elias felt the presence there, the same slow, heavy patience they had seen earlier in daylight. The saber-toothed cat was near. The largest male moved to the edge of the group, standing tall, his posture a warning. He picked up a thick fallen branch and held it like a spear. The gesture was primitive but unmistakable. This ground is ours tonight. For a time, the night held still. The only movement was the flicker of insects across the air. Then came another sound, closer, the low, rolling growl of a predator. It was deep enough to feel in the chest. One of the juveniles whimpered. A female pulled it close, her eyes scanning the dark. The cat did not rush. It padded forward slowly, its massive paws silent on the leaf litter. The first visible part was the glint of its teeth, when it turned its head slightly toward the faint starlight. Then its shoulders appeared, broad and muscular, followed by the smooth line of its back. It was larger up close than Elias had imagined, nearly the size of a lion, but heavier in the forequarters, the neck thick with muscle to drive those killing teeth home. It circled them, keeping just outside the range of a thrown stone or stick. Every so often it would stop, crouch slightly, and flick its tail, testing their resolve. The largest male barked, short, sharp bursts, and the others joined, stamping the ground, throwing loose branches, making themselves seem larger. The cat's ears twitched back at the noise. For long minutes, predator and prey held the standoff. Then the cat's head turned sharply toward the river. From downstream came another noise, a heavy splash, followed by the bellow of something massive. The hippos. Their territory was closer than the group had realized. The cat hesitated, torn between two potential hunts. Its tail lashed once, twice. Then it turned and melted back into the darkness toward the water. The group stayed tense for a long time after it was gone, every ear straining for its return. But the only sounds were the rushing river and, faintly, the distant bellows of the hippos. Eventually, the juveniles curled against their mothers and sleep, returned to the group in uneven, restless waves. Elias did not sleep. He kept his eyes on the tree line, listening to the night breathe. The first light came pale and thin, a grey wash that softened the sharp edges of the night. It crept along the riverbank, picking out the glint of wet leaves, the sheen of water still clinging to tall grasses. The air was cool, touched with the scent of wet clay and fresh growth. The group stirred slowly. Stiff limbs straightened, backs arched, and the quiet murmurs of waking carried over the soft rush of the river. The juveniles clung to their mothers, eyes still half closed. Elias had not truly slept. He had spent the night listening for the sound of padded feet in the dark. Now, in the early light, he scanned the tree line where the saber-toothed cat had vanished. Nothing moved there. The world seemed still, almost too still. It was then he noticed the change in the river. The swollen water, restless and wild yesterday, had lost some of its edge. The surface still flowed fast, but it no longer clawed at the bank with the same hunger. Exposed mud shone in shallow crescents along the edges, and here and there, shapes were caught in the receding pools. The largest male saw it too. He gave a short call, gesturing toward the nearest exposed patch. The group moved cautiously, keeping an eye on the tree line as they approached. The mud sucked at their feet as they stepped into the shallows. Small fish darted in desperate bursts between puddles, trapped by the lowering water. Frogs leapt clumsily, their slick bodies shining in the morning light. The females waded into a deeper pool, splashing with quick hands, trapping fish against the muddy edge. The juveniles followed, squealing with excitement each time they caught one. Soon, the air was filled with the smell of fresh catch. But it wasn't just fish. At the far end of a wide curve in the bank, a larger shape struggled weakly in the shallows. At first, it looked like a pile of reeds. Then it moved, and Elias saw the thin, trembling legs, the soaked fur plastered to a narrow body. A young antelope, likely swept away in the flood, now too exhausted to stand. Two males moved toward it, careful in the mud. The animal gave a weak kick but had no strength to escape. A quick blow ended its struggle. The carcass was dragged higher onto dry ground. It was small but fresh, a gift from the river. They began to strip meat, their hands working with practiced speed. But before they were halfway through, a sound cut across the quiet morning. A low grunt. It came again, louder this time. From upriver. The group froze, hands still gripping the antelope's hide. Then they saw movement, not from the trees, but from the water itself. A wide, dark head broke the surface, followed by another and another. Hippos, moving downstream. Their massive bodies sent ripples rolling across the river. The largest male barked sharply, urging the group away from the water's edge. Hippos were dangerous even in calm water. And here, in the narrowed post-flood channel, they would brook no competition for space. The group backed toward the acacias, dragging the antelope with them. The hippos passed without turning toward the bank, their small eyes fixed forward, their ears flicking in the morning light. It seemed the danger had passed. Then the tree line opposite shifted. Elias saw it before the others, a flicker of movement, the shape of something low and sleek moving through the grass. The saber-toothed cat. It had been watching, waiting, and now, with the river shallower, it had its chance. The cat stepped onto the exposed mud, its paws sinking but steady. Its head was low, eyes locked on the antelope carcass. The distance was still wide, but the water between them was no longer a roaring barrier. The largest male snarled, throwing a stone that splashed near the cat's feet. It did not stop. One slow step. Another. The water reached its chest, but it kept moving, muscles bunching beneath its slick coat. The group gathered in a tight knot, brandishing sticks and stones. The cat's eyes flicked between them and the carcass. It made its choice. With a sudden burst, it lunged forward, sending a spray of water into the air. The water exploded upward as the saber-toothed cat surged forward. its massive body throwing waves toward the bank. For an instant, its head vanished beneath the surface, then rose again, eyes locked and teeth bared. The group scattered into two halves, one pulling the carcass further inland, the other forming a ragged line between the predator and the prize. Sticks lifted, stones clutched tight. They shouted in sharp bursts, trying to make their bodies seem larger, their voices harsher. But the cat did not slow. It reached the shallows with long, bounding strides. Mud sucked at its paws, water streamed from its shoulders. The sheer power of its approach was enough to make even the largest male take a step back. Elias felt his pulse hammer in his ears. Every detail of the cat was sharp in the morning light, the deep gold of its fur, the black lines around its eyes, the long, curved canines that gleamed as it roared. The largest male hurled his stone. It struck the cat's shoulder with a dull thunk. The animal flinched but didn't break stride. Two more stones followed, splashing near its legs. It growled low, a rumble that made the ground seem to vibrate, and lunged up the bank. The first clash was chaos. The cat swiped with one massive paw, knocking a stick from a male's grip and sending him stumbling back. Another jabbed at its side with a sharpened branch, the point skidding along wet fur but failing to pierce. The cat roared again, twisting its head toward the antelope carcass. The group holding it struggled to drag it faster, their feet slipping in the wet clay. Elias didn't think, he moved. He grabbed a heavy rock from the ground, both hands gripping it tight. As the cat lunged for the meat, Elias stepped into its path and swung. The rock connected with the side of its skull. Not enough to drop it, but enough to stagger it. The largest male seized the moment. He slammed his branch into the cat's flank, hard enough to make it hiss and whirl toward him. The movement brought the carcass bearers a few more precious steps inland. But the cat was far from finished. It lowered itself into a crouch, tail lashing, ears flat. Its eyes were pure hunger now, no hesitation. Elias knew it was about to strike again. The group answered with everything they had. Sticks jabbed from three sides, stones pelted its back. Shouts rang out in sharp rhythm. The air was thick with the smell of wet fur, mud, and fear. The cat lunged, but this time, it was met by a wall of noise and pain. A stick jabbed deep into its shoulder, another cracked against its jaw. A rock struck one of its forelegs. It snarled, swiping blindly, and caught only air. For a heartbeat, predator and prey locked eyes. Then, with a final growl, the cat backed away, step by slow step, never turning its back until it was in the shallows again. It crossed the river in silence, muscles bunching with every movement, then vanished into the tall grass on the far side. The group stood frozen, chests heaving, eyes fixed on where it had gone. Only when the last rustle of grass had faded did they turn back to the carcass. It lay in the dirt, half covered in mud, but untouched. The largest male let out a short, triumphant bark. Others echoed it, not loud enough to carry far, but enough to tell one another we faced it, and we are still here. They carried the antelope into the deeper cover of the acacias. The meat would be shared, the bones cracked for marrow, the hide perhaps stripped for later use. It was more than food. It was proof that together, they could drive off even the great cat. But Elias could not shake the memory of those eyes, and the knowledge that somewhere in the grass, the saber-toothed predator still waited.